Maria had always been a dedicated nurse. She loved her job because it allowed her to help people, especially those who were in the most need. After completing her training, she quickly found a job at one of the top hospitals in the city. It wasn't an easy task, but Maria was determined to give her best and prove herself. Her compassion and hard work quickly earned her a good reputation among her colleagues and patients. One day, Maria was assigned to take care of a patient who was in a coma. The patient, Mr. William Turner, was an elderly billionaire who had been in the hospital for weeks after suffering a stroke. Maria had heard of him before. Everyone in the city had. Mr. Turner was well known not just for his vast wealth, but for his charitable work and his status as one of the wealthiest people in the country. People often spoke about him in awe, and now Maria was to take care of him. She was a little nervous. She had never been assigned to care for such a high-profile patient, and she worried about living up to the expectations. But Maria was a professional, and she was determined to do her job with the same care and attention she gave to all her patients. As she walked into Mr. Turner's private room, she was struck by the stark contrast between the clinical space and the luxurious setting. The room had everything: soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and even a personal nurse to attend to his every need. Mr. Turner lay in bed, his eyes closed, connected to machines that beeped rhythmically, monitoring his heart rate and oxygen levels. Maria gently adjusted his IV and checked his vitals, her hands steady as she worked. She had seen many patients in similar states before, and while she always remained professional, she couldn't help but wonder about the person lying in the bed. Who was he outside of the hospital room? What was his life like before the stroke? The world knew him as a wealthy businessman, but to Maria, he was just another patient who needed care and attention. Over the next few days, Maria spent more time with Mr. Turner. She talked to him while she worked, even though she knew he couldn't respond. She spoke about her day, shared stories about her life, and played soft music in the background, hoping it might help comfort him. Maria had read somewhere that even coma patients could hear, and she hoped that her presence was somehow bringing him peace. One afternoon, while she was sitting beside his bed, Maria noticed a photograph on the bedside table. It was an old picture, faded with age, of a man and a woman standing together, both smiling warmly at the camera. Maria paused for a moment, curious. The woman in the photo looked familiar, but Maria couldn't quite place where she had seen her before. As she continued to care for Mr. Turner, Maria became more curious about the picture. She couldn't help but wonder about the woman in the photo. Who was she? And what role had she played in Mr. Turner's life? Every day, Maria found herself thinking more and more about the mysterious woman in the photograph, but she didn't want to invade her patient's privacy. Little did Maria know, this photograph would soon lead her down a path that would change everything she thought she knew about Mr. Turner's life. Days passed, and Maria continued her daily routine caring for Mr. Turner. Each day, she made sure he was comfortable, checked his vitals, and spoke to him as if he could hear her. The photograph on the bedside table still lingered in her mind. She often found herself staring at it when she had a moment of free time. The woman in the photo seemed so familiar, but Maria couldn't figure out where she had seen her before. One evening, as Maria sat beside Mr. Turner's bed, the hospital room quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitors, she decided to ask the nurse on shift about the photo. Maybe they knew who the woman was. As she stepped out of the room, she spotted a fellow nurse, Jane, passing by. "Hey Jane, do you know who this is?" Maria asked, showing her the photograph of the woman. Jane glanced at the picture, her expression changing slightly. "Ah, that's Mira," she said, her voice quiet. She was Mr. Turner's wife, many years ago. Maria was surprised. She hadn't expected Jane to know anything about the woman in the picture. "Oh, so she's his wife. What happened to her?" Jane hesitated, looking around as if she didn't want to be overheard. "It's not something we talk about much," Jane said in a low voice. "But from what I know, Mira passed away a long time ago. She and Mr. Turner had a very special bond. But there were complications in their lives. It was a tragic time for him. Maria nodded, feeling a sense of sadness for the billionaire who had been through so much. She couldn't help but wonder what had happened between the couple, why it was something no one wanted to talk about. She had only just started to care for Mr. Turner, but she could tell that his life had been filled with both great successes and deep sorrow. As the days passed, Mr. Turner's condition started to improve. Slowly but surely, he regained some of his strength. His eyes would flutter open, and he would make small movements with his fingers. Maria was encouraged by these signs of progress, though she knew that his recovery would take time. One day, as Maria was adjusting his blanket, Mr. Turner opened his eyes. For a moment, he stared at her in confusion. Maria's heart skipped a beat as she smiled warmly at him. "Mr. Turner," she said gently, "how are you feeling today?" His eyes were still a little cloudy, but he seemed to focus on her. "Who are you?" he asked in a weak voice. "Where am I?" Maria took a deep breath, trying not to be startled by his question. "You're in the hospital, Mr. Turner. You've been ill, but you're getting better now," she explained softly. For a moment, he just stared at her, as if trying to process the information. Then his eyes shifted to the photograph on the bedside table. "Is Mira here?" he asked, his voice tinged with sadness. Maria paused. She knew the woman in the photo was important to him, but she didn't know how to answer. She had heard nothing about Mira's passing until now. "No, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "Mira isn't here, but I'm here to help you, and we'll make sure you get the care you need." He closed his eyes again, a single tear escaping down his cheek. Maria felt her heart ache for him. She couldn't imagine the pain he had carried all these years, but she also knew that her role now was to help him heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. As she continued to care for him, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something deep and unresolved. She had only just begun to uncover the layers of Mr. Turner's life, and she had no idea how much of a surprise was waiting for her next. The next few days were a blur of medical checkups, soft conversations, and small steps in Mr. Turner's recovery. His eyes were opening more frequently, and his body was slowly starting to respond to the treatments. But even as he improved, the question of Mira still lingered in the air. Maria couldn't shake the image of the photo, and the words that Jane had shared about Mr. Turner's lost love echoed in her mind. One afternoon, while Maria was attending to her usual duties, she had a quiet moment with Mr. Turner. He was more awake than usual, his eyes following her movements as she checked his IV. "Maria," he whispered suddenly, his voice raspy but clear enough for her to hear, "I need to tell you something." Maria looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. She had been expecting him to ask about Mira again, but she wasn't prepared for what he would say next. "Mira, she wasn't just my wife. She was everything to me. She helped me build everything I have, and she was the love of my life," he said, his voice filled with emotion. But the world doesn't know the whole story. Maria's curiosity piqued. She had a feeling there was much more to the story than what Jane had shared. "What do you mean, Mr. Turner?" she asked gently, her voice soft as she moved closer to the bed. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "People think Mira and I had a perfect life. We had wealth, success, everything anyone could want. But there was more, Maria. There were secrets, things I could never tell anyone." Maria waited, her heart racing as she realized Mr. Turner was opening up to her, letting her see a side of him that no one else knew. "Mira and I came from two very different worlds," Mr. Turner continued. "She was from a humble background, and when we got together, there were people who didn't like it. They tried to separate us, tried to convince me that I could do better. But she was strong, and we fought for our love. We built an empire together, but it came at a cost." Maria listened carefully, sensing the weight of his words. It seemed that Mira was more than just a partner to Mr. Turner. She had been a pillar of his strength, someone who had stood by him through thick and thin. One day, there was a tragedy, a car accident, he said, his voice trailing off. It took her from me, just like that. And the world never knew the truth. They only knew the man who lost his wife. But Mira's death, it broke me. Maria felt a deep sadness for Mr. Turner. She had heard of his success and wealth, but now she was beginning to understand the hidden grief he had carried for so many years. I never remarried, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't. No one could ever replace Mira. She was everything. But people still didn't understand. They thought I moved on, but I never did. Maria felt a deep empathy for the elderly man lying in front of her. She could see the pain in his eyes, a pain that had been buried for so long. He had been living in the shadows of his grief, hiding from the world. As she adjusted his blanket and checked his vitals, Maria made a silent promise to herself. She would help him heal, not just physically, but emotionally. She would be there for him, helping him come to terms with the past so that he could move forward. But little did she know, the secrets of Mr. Turner's life were just beginning to unfold. And soon, Maria would learn that the past held far more than she could ever imagine. As the days passed, Maria continued to care for Mr. Turner, helping him recover physically from the stroke. He was starting to regain some strength, but emotionally, it was clear that he was still struggling with the loss of Mira. She could see it in the way he would sometimes stare out the window, lost in his thoughts, or when his face would tighten with grief as he remembered her. Maria knew that his healing would take time, and she was determined to be there for him, no matter how long it took. One afternoon, Maria was going through Mr. Turner's room when she came across a thick folder hidden under some papers on his desk. Curious, she opened it and found a stack of old documents, letters, and photographs. Most of them were dated from the time before the accident that had taken Mira's life. The photos were of Mr. Turner and Mira, taken during the happiest years of their lives together, at charity events, on vacations, and at family gatherings. But what caught Maria's attention was the last photograph in the folder. It was a picture of Mira, standing alone in a garden, holding a small child in her arms. The child's face was partially obscured by Mira's embrace, but Maria could tell from the way Mira was looking at the child that it was someone very important to her. Maria felt a pang of curiosity. Was this their child? She had never heard anything about Mr. Turner and Mira having a child. All the stories she had heard mentioned only Mira's tragic death. Maria carefully placed the photo down and walked back to Mr. Turner's bedside. He was awake, looking out of the window, but when he noticed her, he turned toward her. His eyes seemed clearer now, and he was more alert. "Mr. Turner," Maria said gently, "I found something while cleaning. A photo of Mira holding a child. Who was that?" His eyes widened for a brief moment, and then a look of sadness crossed his face. He sighed deeply and motioned for Maria to come closer. "That child," he began softly, "was my daughter." Maria's heart skipped a beat. "Your daughter?" She repeated in disbelief. "I had no idea you had a child." Mr. Turner nodded slowly, his expression pained. "I never talked about her," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Her name was Leela. She was born after Mira and I married. We were so happy to have her, but she was taken from us. We lost her when she was just a toddler, and it broke Mira and me completely. It was a tragedy, one that I'd never been able to truly recover from." Maria sat down beside him, listening intently. She had never imagined such a thing. She had assumed that Mira's death had been the only major loss in Mr. Turner's life, but this revelation opened up a whole new chapter of his past. "Leela was everything to us," Mr. Turner continued, his voice trembling slightly. "She was the joy of our lives. But she died in a car accident, right before Mira passed away. It was too much for us to handle. After Lila's death, Mira couldn't cope, and a year later, she was gone too. I never spoke about it because it was too painful. I shut it all out." Maria felt a deep sadness for Mr. Turner. It was clear that the loss of his daughter and wife had devastated him in ways that no one could truly understand. As Maria looked at him, she realized that Mr. Turner had never truly healed from his past. His grief had been buried so deep that it seemed to consume him every day, even now. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Turner," Maria said quietly, her heart heavy with sympathy. "I can't imagine what you've been through. But I promise you, I'm here to help you. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Mr. Turner smiled faintly, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Maria," he whispered. "You've already helped me more than you know." In that moment, Maria realized that her role as a nurse went far beyond physical care. She was becoming part of Mr. Turner's healing process, helping him face the past and find the strength to move forward. Little did she know that the secrets of his past were far from over, and there was much more to discover. But Maria was ready. She had already come this far, and now she was determined to help Mr. Turner find peace. Over the next few days, Maria continued to care for Mr. Turner, keeping a close eye on his physical progress. His recovery was slow but steady, and each small improvement felt like a victory. But even as his body healed, his mind remained trapped in the past, constantly revisiting the pain of losing Mira and their daughter, Leela. Maria could see how deeply this affected him, and she felt an overwhelming desire to help him heal from the emotional scars that seemed to linger so heavily. One afternoon, as Maria was checking his vitals, she noticed that Mr. Turner seemed quieter than usual. His eyes were closed, and his face looked more relaxed, but there was an unreadable expression on his face. Maria sat down beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. She had always been careful not to push him too hard, but she also knew that Mr. Turner needed to find a way to move forward, to honor Mira and Leela without letting the pain define his entire life. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, "I know it's been hard, and I know you've been through so much, but I want to help you find peace. You don't have to carry all of this alone." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Mr. Turner opened his eyes and turned his gaze toward her. His face softened, and he sighed deeply. "I don't know if I can ever truly find peace, Maria," he said, his voice shaky. "Losing Mira and Leela it was too much. I've lived my whole life trying to fill the empty spaces they left behind, but nothing has ever been enough. I've tried everything, from my businesses to all the charity work I've done. But in the end, it all feels hollow." Maria listened carefully, her heart heavy for the man who had so much, but had lost everything that truly mattered to him. She could understand how his grief had shaped him into the person he was today, but she also believed that he could heal, even if it seemed impossible. "Maybe you can't change the past," Maria said gently, "but you can make a choice about what you do with the present. You've been through so much, but you're still here. And you're not alone anymore. I'm here to help you find a way forward. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it can be something." Mr. Turner looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "I don't know where to begin," he admitted. "It feels like everything I've done in my life has been in memory of them. But I don't know if that's enough anymore. I don't know how to live without them." Maria placed a hand on his, offering him a simple gesture of comfort. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she said. "You just have to take it one day at a time. And maybe one day you'll find that living for yourself isn't so impossible after all." For the first time in a long while, Mr. Turner seemed to consider her words. He didn't speak, but there was a small shift in his expression. A glimmer of hope, faint but present, flickered in his eyes. Maria could see that he was beginning to think about the future in a different way. It was a small step, but it was progress. That night, as Maria left the hospital, she reflected on the conversation. She knew that Mr. Turner's healing would be a long and difficult journey, but she also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had started to open up to her, and that was the first step toward finding the peace he so desperately needed. And for the first time, Maria believed that he could find it. It wouldn't happen overnight, but with each new day, There was hope for a better tomorrow. As the weeks went by, Mr. Turner's progress became more evident. His physical recovery was steady, and he was regaining more strength each day. He was able to sit up on his own, take short walks around his room, and even have longer conversations with Maria. But while his body was healing, Maria noticed that the emotional scars were still deep. Mr. Turner had moments of clarity and connection, but his past, the memories of Mira and Leela, often pulled him back into a cloud of sadness. Maria spent as much time as possible talking to him, helping him process his thoughts. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was committed to helping him find a way forward. One afternoon, as she helped him with some light physical therapy, she noticed that he seemed lost in thought again. His gaze was distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Mr. Turner," Maria said gently, her voice soft. "What are you thinking about?" He looked at her, as if just noticing her presence. "I was thinking about how much time I've wasted," he said quietly. "How much time I've spent chasing things that don't matter. After Mira and Leela passed, I buried myself in work and wealth. I thought I could fill the emptiness with things, but nothing ever worked. Now, here I am, still grieving, still stuck in the past." Maria paused, carefully choosing her words. She could sense the deep regret in his voice, the longing for something he could never get back. "It's okay to feel that way," she said softly. "But you're still here, Mr. Turner. And you're starting to heal. You've made it this far. Maybe it's not about getting everything back. Maybe it's about finding a new way to live." He nodded slowly but didn't respond right away. Maria could see that he was processing her words. The pain of losing Mira and Leela was something he would never fully get over, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to live with it. Over the next few days, Maria noticed a subtle change in Mr. Turner. He began to ask more questions about the world outside his hospital room. He expressed interest in what was happening in the city, in current events, and even asked Maria about her life. She shared stories about her daughter, her family, and her dreams. The conversation was light at first, but it was a sign that he was starting to reconnect with the world around him. One afternoon, as Maria was sitting beside his bed, Mr. Turner turned to her with a serious look on his face. "Maria," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. I know I've caused a lot of pain in my life, and I'm not proud of it. But I want to make things right, as much as I can. I want to honor Mira and Leela. I want to do something meaningful with the time I have left." Maria was taken aback by his words, surprised by the sudden shift in his mindset. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. Mr. Turner took a deep breath, looking out the window. "I spent my life building an empire," he said, his voice steady. "But I've neglected the things that truly matter. I want to give back. I want to help those who need it, not just with money, but with my time and my heart. I want to honor my family's memory by doing something good for the world." Maria's heart swelled with pride for him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the determination to make a difference. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Mr. Turner," she said warmly. "You have so much to offer. And this could be the start of a new chapter for you." For the first time in months, Maria saw a light in Mr. Turner's eyes that wasn't just about his past pain. It was about hope for the future. It was clear that he was finally ready to live again, not just for himself, but for the people he loved, and for the people who needed him. And in that moment, Maria realized that she had played a part in helping him rediscover his purpose. Mr. Turner still had a long way to go in his healing journey, but now, with a new sense of purpose, he was ready to face the world again. And Maria would be there every step of the way, supporting him as he took the next steps toward a brighter future. Weeks turned into months, and Maria continued to witness Mr. Turner's recovery. He had started to engage more with the world around him, no longer lost in the shadows of his past. His physical health improved every day, and his mental state seemed stronger too. For the first time in years, he began to look forward to the future, not just reflect on the losses of his past. Maria had seen the transformation, and it made her feel proud to be part of his journey. One afternoon, as she sat beside his bed, Mr. Turner asked her to stay after her shift. He had something important to discuss. Maria agreed, curious about what he had to say. When she walked into his room later, he was sitting up, a smile on his face, a far cry from the man who had been lying in a coma only months before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Mr. Turner began, his voice steady and clear, "about living for today and making things right. And I've decided to make some changes. I want to leave behind a legacy that actually matters, something that will honor Mira and Leela, and maybe make a real difference in the world." Maria listened closely, her heart swelling with hope for him. She could sense that this wasn't just talk. Mr. Turner had a new purpose. "I've spoken to some of my old colleagues," he continued, "and I've decided to donate a large portion of my wealth to causes that mean something to me, to organizations that help children who are facing hardships, just like Leela did. I want to build a foundation in their names, something that will support families in need, provide education, and make a lasting impact on the lives of those who need it most." Maria felt a rush of emotion as she heard these words. It was clear that Mr. Turner wasn't just looking to give away money. He was looking to create something meaningful, to leave behind a legacy of love and kindness, something that would continue to help others long after he was gone. "I've spent so many years focused on business and wealth," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "But now, I see what really matters. It's not the money or the fame. It's helping others. It's about making sure that Mira and Leela's memory lives on in a way that actually helps people." Maria nodded, her heart full. "That's a beautiful way to honor them," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you're right. The impact you make on the world now will be the true legacy you leave behind. You've already done so much for so many people. Now you can do even more." Mr. Turner smiled and looked out the window, as if picturing the future. "I want to give people the chance to create a better life, just like I had the chance to. Mira would have wanted that. Lila would have wanted that." Maria stayed with him for a while longer, talking about his plans and helping him brainstorm ideas for the foundation. It was clear to her that Mr. Turner had found his purpose once again. He wasn't just recovering physically, he was healing emotionally as well, finding a way to move forward in a way that truly mattered. When Maria left his room that day, she couldn't help but feel proud of the man he had become. He had started this journey lost and broken, but now he was building something meaningful. He was living with a sense of purpose, not defined by his past, but by what he could give to the world. As Maria walked out of the hospital that evening, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had helped Mr. Turner rediscover the joy of living, the joy of giving. And in doing so, she had also reminded herself of the power of second chances and the importance of finding purpose in life. She was certain that the road ahead would be full of challenges, but it was also full of hope. And that hope, she believed, could change everything.